Freelancers, small business owners, consultants, and solopreneurs. Some people are just drawn to working for themselves. I'm Owen Roth. In this show, I have conversations with self-employed folks about their career journeys. Welcome to the Bossless Path podcast.
And here we go. Today I'm joined by Jacob Oliver, owner and operator of Common Fields here in Corvallis, Oregon. Jacob, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So tell us a little bit about what you do now.
I am the owner and operator of Common Fields. You know, if you haven't been out at Common Fields, it's a very unique place. So it's kind of got that food truck kind of vibe going. We have a taproom there, and that's kind of also very unique. You know, we only carry local beer, but we don't go through any distributors. They have to be independently owned for us to carry them. And so what's kind of unique about that is that we're able to carry these beers that you don't see around town, and they're kind of like small breweries that don't really get much love, but we're able to focus on kind of this all-independent beer. So that's kind of what makes the taproom unique. When we were doing that kind of concept, we also wanted to have a food truck pod. So you kind of go in, and it's this kind of open space. It's kind of like a little oasis.
Mm-hmm. I can speak to it myself because I've been there. It's not that far from where I live. I've been there many times, and it's a really cool vibe that you have. Like, for those who haven't been there, there's food trucks on the outside. How many do you have?
We have 4 now.
4.
One is kind of a pop-up, so it changes week to week. Kind of part of the challenge is with the space being small, we can only have really 4 trucks,
right,
but we want to have that variety.
Yeah.
So we have 3 that are essentially there all the time. They're on long-term leases. We have a Mediterranean, a German, and a Salvadorian, and that pop-up gives us the flexibility of having every day we have kind of a new concept that we do. We do a lot of them ourselves, so we're partnered with different chefs to kind of create a fun pop-up. And that's a pretty new concept, so we don't have a lot right now.
Yeah.
But like Fridays, we do poke bowls. That's a lot of fun. We've got some other ideas we're tossing around. We want to do like maybe pierogies would be kind of a fun thing to do. You know, so we kind of look for cuisine that they really isn't represented in Corvallis, and that's kind of how we decide what we want to do food-wise there.
Gotcha. Yeah, and tell us, describe to people who haven't been there like me, what like the kind of layout you have in Common Fields.
Yeah, so you kind of walk in. The whole place is kind of fenced off. So when you first see it, you just see like the sign, and you're like, oh, what is this place? You go in, and there's going to be a bunch of gazebos. We have a stage, lots of like greenery, lots of trees and shade, and then in the center is a tap room, and that's kind of like an old converted like auto shop essentially, with roll-up doors, and you kind of walk in there, and there's lots of natural wood, natural lighting. Outside, there's lots of really cool little nooks with like picnic tables, and it's set up where we have, with the stage, we can do live music, we do lots of shows, trivia, comedy shows, so we get lots of different things kind of going on, but it's kind of neat because it's a pretty big space, but it doesn't feel like overwhelmingly big. There's a lot of little nooks, and it's cool because you can show up with like 150 people, like a big reservation, and only take up like a small area, or it's a good sized space you'll take up, but it doesn't feel like somebody else coming in isn't like, oh my gosh, this place is packed.
Yeah,
like,
just coming in and dominating space and be like, oh, am I even welcome here as like an outsider to this large group?
Exactly. But the fact that you can have a huge crowd, like we had a couple weeks ago, right around 100 people show up, kind of unannounced without any reservation. And we were able to kind of work with it, but it was like, oh my gosh, there's 100 people that showed up. It had to do with like OSU and school and stuff, the student thing. But, the fact that I don't know any other restaurants that can just have even half that, even have like 50 people show up and not be turned away. So that's kind of a cool thing.
Yeah. Also, so people know, like, it's not like a restaurant where you sit down. Like,
I mean, you sit down, obviously, but it's not table service. So it's all counter service. You go up to the bar, which is the kind of inside the tap room, and that's where you get, drinks. We have alcohol, non-alcohol, but that's also where we order majority of the food. And then the food is brought to your table, or in the case of Salvadorian, they would give you a buzzer, and you go pick the food up.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's all open seating, so it's kind of this unique space where you can go sit wherever you want, and then the food will either be brought to you or you can pick it up.
Yeah.
But substantially different than table service.
It's a really cool space, and you've thought of everything because you have like a little bit of indoor seating, and then obviously you have a lot of outdoor seating. But then the outdoor seating, you're smart. You're catering to the Oregon climate.
Yeah, we try to make it unique. We wanted to really focus on outside seating. And so some of the unique things we did is, have some covered areas that have heating. We designed heated benches, actually. And that's kind of one of our most unique features that kind of off the bat gave us kind of an edge for the outside seating. Or we designed these benches essentially that you can flip a switch and turn on. So in the winter, it kind of heats your core up. And we found it to be way more efficient than having all these, big heaters. And those are expensive and they don't add that much heat.
Right.
It's kind of this like deception of heat. Like, oh, the visual is nice, and you're like, I warm my hands, but you're having to stand awkwardly and not really sitting down eating.
Yeah.
We found those heated benches work so much more, and people are more comfortable.
Yeah, they're great.
And it's a much more efficient use of the space and energy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, you guys, like I said, you thought very well through of how to make people comfortable, and not just in the summer months, but also in the winter as well, which is, we have winters here.
We do. And even when it's not winter, it rains a lot. So we wanted to keep people as dry as we can, and, have that focus be that outside space. And it's also something you just don't see in Corvallis. Like, people have outside dining where they have a table or two, but nobody has just a dedicated, like, most of your restaurant is all outside. And so it's nice to kind of have that. And
yeah. We'll probably touch more about the details of your involvement. I know the story behind bringing Common Fields to fruition, basically, is a detailed one. But could we go back and just start at, like, your working career and, like, work your way to the present day?
I mean, I've kind of always been in the restaurant industry. I started pretty young, in high school, even, I guess it was pretty early high school, just working any job I can, just very interested in doing my own thing, but like learning as much as I could. I started out in fast food. So I worked those, and, they're definitely a grind. It's not a glamorous job, but there's so many skills you learn, how to deal with people, how to deal with stress, high workload, all that. So I kind of started there. Then I worked into some diners. After I graduated school, gained an interest in the culinary arts. So I was trying to kind of get into school for that. And it was just one of those things that never quite worked out. Trying to work and go to school, I ended up turning what was going to be a culinary degree into more of a business degree because I just couldn't get into culinary arts. It was one of those things at the time, everybody wanted to do it.
Yeah.
So there was a pretty big wait list. So I was like, okay, I'll wait next year and do all my, basic requirements for school. And then next year still didn't get in. And finally I was like, maybe I'll just do a business degree. And kind of at that point I'd been working in the restaurants for quite a while. So I had, there's always more knowledge to know, but
of course
I had, quite a bit of experience. And I was kind of like, I don't know if I really want to keep investing in culinary arts. Just because, you got to make money, and school was challenging to do that and work at the same time.
Yeah.
So yeah, I bounced around a lot. And at one point I managed a chain of Quiznos restaurants actually, and that was here in town. And I think they're all closed now. So that was kind of a fun experience. I did that for about 4-ish years. Yeah, I want to say it was about 4 years, and I learned a lot of just how to kind of really manage. That was the first time I took the step from working behind the bar or as a server or busboy or kitchen or any of that stuff, and really took on kind of more of that management role.
Gotcha. What I'm curious about the degree in in business. Was that because you thought that might be?
Because at that point I had so all the basic requirements for culinary were basically the same as business, so I only needed a few more business specific, because with culinary you take a lot of some of that stuff. Gotcha. And so I was like, well, I'm not going to wait a whole nother year. Because once you take the class, then the class is 2 years, but it's just part-time. So you're supposed to do culinary arts and do these basic credits between, but I couldn't get into the actual program because it's kind of a start to finish. And so while I was waiting, well, I'll just get ahead of the basic credits and have easier. And since I never actually got in, I was like, by the time I would have got in again, it would have been another 2 years of school. And I was like, I'm kind of done with it. And again, I was taking school very part-time, and I was working 2 or 3 jobs at the time too, paying for, place to stay and all that. So it kind of just fizzled out, and I was like, well, I don't want to have nothing to show. And I saw the benefit in having a business degree. So, take a few extra credits. And this was all done at LBCC as well.
Gotcha.
So at a community college, which made things a lot cheaper and easier.
Yeah. Okay. So you've worked and finished your degree, and then you were managing the Quiznos.
Yeah, it wasn't getting that job wasn't specific to me having a business degree. That was just kind of something I didn't even advertise to anybody. Just I have this now and whatever. So I don't remember the exact time frames. It was so long ago, when I started Quiznos and when and managing, and when I finished that. But I feel like I was still maybe going to school a little part time.
Gotcha.
When I first started it.
Okay.
But yeah, so that I got a lot of experience from just kind of learning how to manage staff more, and then expand to running a couple of restaurants. And I actually got to where I would do consulting at other Quiznos restaurants, where I'd go and kind of help them open them and stuff. So that was kind of fun. So I kind of worked my way up, and originally that was kind of that first step where I was like, I think I want to start a restaurant. And I originally looked into what does it take to start a Quiznos franchise, and realized real quickly that the franchise thing wasn't really for me. I didn't have the control I would want. So when I left Quiznos, me and my wife, we decided we were going to try to start like a restaurant. And so that was kind of our first step. We went through probably 9 months of like the process of like looking for a place, building menu, kind of looking at loans and all that. And then it kind of just fizzled out and didn't really work out. We had a couple good opportunities, but we kind of did our due diligence, and then it ended up those weren't the best opportunities anyways. So we kind of dodged a bullet by not jumping into something we were too young, essentially. I always look back at it would have been nice to like, start that business. And if I had started it, I would have, with just the tenacity that I have, I would have made it work and figured it out. But also now looking back, it's like, I'm so glad I didn't do that because it wasn't said, I wasn't ready, essentially.
Sure.
I would have made it work, but I definitely wasn't ready. And so actually after that, I kind of got a little burnt out on the restaurant stuff. Because I was obviously discouraged, not able to start a business. So I went and worked construction. I was like, I just want to change a pace. I worked, kind of did finish work, cabinetry and stuff for a while. And then after that, I was like, okay, this isn't really making the money I want. So I was kind of looking for something a little more. At this time, I'd actually bought a house too. So I was doing a lot of, with that finish work, I was also doing a lot of projects around the house. We bought a fixer-upper. So I really learned how to just mess up a lot on the house.
Learning mistakes.
But you learn how, how to build stuff. And I kind of had, with my family, I come from like kind of a construction background. So I knew my way around tools and that kind of stuff. But it gave me kind of a good base for kind of what Common Fields became, of like learning how to do a lot of the stuff and everything we did from scratch. As far as the build outs, I started from some of these construction jobs and basically using my house as kind of a canvas for messing things up a lot and fixing things. And so after the construction job, I went and worked at Target, the distribution center, and that was kind of one of those, hey, it's a high paying job. It's kind of just crummy labor. You're working your butt off, but but you get paid really well to do it, and you work a lot of hours. So it was kind of one of those jobs where, it paid the bills, and I was able to use that to save money up. And it wasn't my. I think I worked there for almost 3 years. It probably wasn't my favorites, job kind of time of life as far as working, because I literally was never home. I worked 40 to 60 hours a week. And you made a lot of money, but you never had time to spend it. So it was good to kind of build that up. And it's also we're only 3 or 4 years into owning a house, so we use that to kind of pay stuff off and kind of get back in a better situation. We also had some debt from when we had tried to start the restaurant, so that job helped us really kind of get caught up on that.
Gotcha.
Ahead. And then we had our first kid. And after that, I realized, I don't really want to work a place that I'm miserable anymore. I want to kind of get back in the restaurant industry. So then I kind of started looking back at, restaurants, and I kind of jumped into maybe I'll try to manage some restaurants again. Reached out, went through some interviews, and it just still, nothing quite clicked. And then I actually eventually got a job at OSU cooking in the dining center.
Oh.
And I was able to learn a lot about, I ran one of the food concepts there. So it was a little bit of management for sure. But I got to kind of play around with different cuisines. And then I eventually went and worked in their kind of big prep kitchen more, and really learned how to make big batch sizes of food. And, kind of looked at just my approach at cooking. Really, when I approach all jobs, is how much knowledge can I learn about this thing before I get bored and move on to the next. So I'm just kind of trying to, fill this repertoire of okay, all this information, and eventually I'll use it for if I ever start something. But even at that time, I wasn't thinking about I can't wait to start another business or another restaurant. It was just I just always wanted to know more, and who knows when you'll use it. I worked there for I want to say about 3 years, and then the challenge with that is with the school closing in the summers, I had to find a job, a part-time summer job.
Oh, okay.
So that was kind of always the challenge, and so I actually the first couple of summers I went to Hawaii. I have family that lived there, and I would go do construction again. So I would work kind of as a general contractor doing the cabinet install and finish work, but for both Home Depot and Lowe's. And so that was kind of fun. I got to go into these nice big mansions and houses and fix them up and build new cabinets. And it was definitely a lot different from the cabinet work I did here.
I'm sure.
So I would do that in the summers, and I'd come back and work at OSU.
How did you work that with your family? Did you guys all move there for?
So for me, it was hard because we still had kids, and it was one of those things that we needed the money. So I would just go work for 2 months, and then come back, and so it was kind of a little bit of separation for the family for sure.
Yeah.
But at the time, my wife wasn't working at all either. We had 2 kids, and it really got to so we had our second kid by this point, and it got to where it to have, it made more sense for her to stay home, that she couldn't make enough money to pay for the childcare of 2 kids. It just didn't even out. So she stayed home, took care of them. Eventually that turned into her starting a preschool at home.
Oh, really?
So she's like, if I'm going to be home watching my kids, I might as well watch other kids. And that kind of grew into, before we started Confield, she actually had a 16-kid full preschool that she ran.
Wow.
And with multiple staffs. And, pandemic changed that. And unfortunately, that kind of fizzled out. But yeah, so that's kind of, it was harder. It would be hard for her to leave to go to Hawaii for just a couple months. And especially at that point, she was just starting the preschool.
Right.
So either way, it was a little rocky. It was definitely a challenge of, we got to make money, and that being away from each other for that long was not easy either.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of where we were like, okay, I feel like I could have learned more at OCU, but I was kind of done.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was looking for something else. And then that was really at the point I ended up applying for Block 15. And that is probably one of the more influential places I worked that helped me kind of get to where I am now. I was there for almost 8 years. I think it was about 8 years. And I started just in the kitchen there. And I just wanted to, the cooking was so different there, and they did a lot of stuff from scratch.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of things I was able to kind of learn that kind of got me more excited about food. And I was already kind of building that excitement at OSU, doing all this scratch stuff. But theirs was just so different, where OSU was doing these huge scales, and they were kind of focusing, just on this pub. Because I had that kind of hard work mentality, I was able to kind of work up the ranks pretty quickly and get a lot of freedom to kind of do what I want and learn as much as I wanted. So I kind of went from, really focusing on prep and the kind of those elements of cooking to I had an opportunity to kind of take over the baking, and I was kind of the baker for a while. Mm-hmm. Worked on the line, and then I kind of wanted to branch more into the brewery stuff. I started getting, by this time, and actually really at OSU, I started getting more of a love of beer, and I was never really into beer before.
Had you been doing home brewing or anything?
I had a little bit. At our, the house that we owned, we had 6 bedrooms, and to help pay for it, we had a lot of roommates. So, once we had kids, that kind of fizzled out. But one of the roommates was a home brewer, and that kind of got me a little more into trying craft beer. And I was like, okay, maybe I do like beer. And then that kind of got me into like, okay, I should apply for Block 15 because, at that time I was like, they're making some of the best beer out there. So I was drinking that more.
For those who don't know, who don't know what Block 15 is, who might be watching or listening, it's a it's here in Corvallis. It's a big brewery.
Big brewery, taproom. They've kind of expanded now to the point where they're in a couple states, and they're definitely making a big name for themselves. But a really good, kind of family run craft brewery.
Yeah. So you were doing a lot of different things there, it sounds like. Yeah.
So at this point, I kind of had the opportunity to branch out and more into the brewery, and I was like, well, maybe what I want to do is be a brewer, and maybe, I like the food, but I kind of that culinary take. I was like, maybe I could use that in like the brewing side. So I kind of applied a few times, and it ended up kind of working my way into the brewery side at Block 15. And at this point too, since I knew I was doing this, I actually got a job as a brewer at Oregon Trail Brewing at this time. So I was kind of working too. I was working in the kitchen at Block, and then I was running the brewery at Oregon Trail. So I was using that to kind of get some more experience. And it was a small brewery, and it was kind of a 2 or 3 person operation. So you pretty much did everything yourself. So it was a great way. And really, Oregon Trail was always kind of a great tool. So many good brewers that kind of came out of Corvallis, worked at Oregon Trail at one point. And
is that right?
So it's kind of an interesting, and we all kind of like, oh, yeah, I worked there too. You bump into someone's like, oh, yeah, you worked at Oregon Trail at one point too.
That's funny for such a small operation that there'd be so many people.
So many people would go there because, Dave Wills at the time was the owner, and he gave a lot of flexibility. Like, yeah, come in, show me what you can do, and you're going to work hard, but, it's a good opportunity. A lot of breweries don't give people that opportunity just to jump in and kind of run the brewery. Mm-hmm. So I think that was appealing to a lot of people who had these ambitions to start breweries, but like, hey, let's start here and learn how to, brew on this kind of system. And so that was a great, for me, learning experience too. I learned a lot about brewing and brewing on a smaller scale, and just kind of doing it when you don't have all these fancy tools. You're just trying to have to figure things out.
Right.
So that was fun. And eventually that led me to kind of working more in the brewery side of Block 15. At this point, they were just a small pub, and they were building their second location, and they were starting to do their own distribution. Mm-hmm. And so that was kind of when I got hired into more of the distribution side. And me and Chris Althouse, who is one of the owners of Oakshire now, I guess always has been, but he worked there with me. And so the two of us kind of helped build the distribution there. I was driving around delivering beer and then doing sales at night. And, it was definitely kind of an interesting, fun learning experience. I learned so much about just, the sales side of things, and learning more kind of like, I guess, taking on more of like the stuff I had gone to school for business for, but I kind of forgot about, spreadsheets and just some of that business stuff that, I hadn't used in 15 plus years. And now all of a sudden I was like dusting it off and remembering how to do all that. So, and I learned how to do a lot more there. So that was pretty cool, and kind of gave me, just experience on like a different side of like the business, and, seeing, a lot of like marketing. And, I had an office at this point, so I'd spent a lot of time in the office, and I was sitting next to a marketing director, and I just seeing all these other, wheels that turned behind the scenes in a business like this, not just, brewing the beer or making the food, but seeing, hey, we need to be like, the branding and what that looks like, and the customer service, but on a different level. It's not like, someone over on the other side of the bar behind a table, dealing with that, where you have accounts now, and, keeping them happy. And so that was just a very different way of doing it, but I actually really enjoyed it. And so I kind of, thrive there, and kind of put everything into that, and like, how can we grow, this distribution? How can we kind of take what the vision that Block 15 was and grow that? And so, yeah. And then I also made a lot of connections too at that point, because I was traveling around to Oregon, selling beer and meeting other breweries and accounts. I started seeing all these other tap rooms, and it kind of reignited, like, I do kind of want to start something up. And at the same time, I guess kind of step back a few years, when I was still in the kitchen, I had started doing kind of cooking on my own again. So me and my wife started going to farmers markets and doing kind of pop-ups with food.
Okay.
Because I was like, maybe I do want to do something. So that was kind of the early iterations of what Kalamata Bistro is now. So we've been doing that. And we just had our little priest full of like some tents and tables, and we popped up and we made hummus, or we would make baklava. Pretty much when I started Block 15, I kind of got that excitement about doing something for myself again. And so I was doing that on the weekends. So I'd work Block 15, the Monday through Friday, and then Saturdays I'd go to the farmer's market and do a little pop-up, and then Sunday I'd sleep or rest,
I see a theme here. There's a lot of work.
A lot of work, and that's my wife can attest to that. It's always, there's not a lot of just sitting down. It's always go, go, go.
Yeah. Well, and it sounds like she's been involved in
very heavily.
a lot of it.
She's been involved in kind of a lot of it, and all of my crazy ideas.
Yeah.
But so we were, by the time I was doing kind of the sales and distribution thing with Block 15, I'd already had Kalamata Bistro up and running for probably 3 years now, and we had just built a food truck that we were starting to use. So that was kind of that next step, where we were doing festivals and doing bigger events, where I would take a week off of work at Block 15 so I could go do a week-long festival with Kalamata Bistro.
Wow.
And we had really built like kind of a full menu now at this point. And then we would actually have some of the cooks from Block 15, they would take their time off and they'd come work with me in the food truck for that weekend. And it kind of, we're building this like, okay, and bouncing ideas across. So I kind of had this good kind of connection working with Block 15, because they had so much staff. Bounce ideas, and there's just so many things that they would do with food and baking. And so it was kind of cool to be able to have those connections. But then going back into the kind of the distribution side of things, I'd be driving around to accounts, checking places out, and I started kind of getting more inspiration of like tap rooms. And I was like, man, there's so many cool places. And I was like, I want to, why doesn't Corvallis have some more of these really cool tap rooms and some unique things? And, once I kind of started doing more sales and stuff in Bend, I really got inspired by some of their food truck pods there.
Yeah,
they're very unique and different compared to like what people sometimes think of food trucks as, like a parking lot with a bunch of carts crammed into them. Bend was so different, and this was kind of the first time I was like, oh wow, this is really neat. Like, maybe we'll move to Bend and bring our food truck there. Like that would be kind of cool. Or just always thinking of like ideas and throwing them around. But I liked how they had, it was less focused on like the food trucks, but more the space. And, they'd be placed at a play area, and they'd have a cool little bar, and they'd have outside seating and fire pits. And I was like, oh, this is really cozy. And this is a place I would want to go to all the time. Not just, you grab food in a parking lot real quick and leave.
Right, yeah.
So that kind of set the early, stages of like, thinking of about common fields. And, we'd always kind of bounce the idea of like, maybe we'll do a tap room. Maybe we'll do this. And, anytime working, we're always like, maybe we'll start something. But it was probably about halfway through working. I worked about 4 years in the distribution side. And probably like the last 2 years of that is where I started like really seriously thinking like, okay, I do want to start something. Let's look at property. Let's start looking around and see what options are out there.
Gotcha. And at that point, I mean, it sounds like you've just had so much experience,
Yeah.
like in the restaurant industry, the
just
beer
anything
industry
I
at that point.
could do, you know, and
Yeah.
even when it was, you know, in distribution, knowing that I wanted to do this, I would like, anytime I go to taproom, I'd ask questions like, hey, you know, tell me about this. What are these taps? You know, trying to learn as much about the taproom side too. And it helped me become better at my job at Block 15 because I really understood, you know, what all the different accounts, you know, some of the struggles and things they're going through and just how the operations worked. And that was kind of like, how can I learn about all these things? I also at this point kind of stepped into really like a bigger role in the distribution where I was doing like all the event coordinating. I was pretty much running all sales. So that was pretty cool. But I had kind of given the ability to really use like as much creativity as I wanted to reach out to accounts and create events with them. And like, hey, let's do this, let's do that. Let's, you know, I did a couple like week-long events where I did one where we went all along the coast and I would spend a week doing events all along the coast with accounts and, you know, kind of coming up with fun ideas. We did one where I went to Seattle for a week and I planned a whole week of events all around Seattle where I just traveled from event to event and kind of made it like this big thing where I also had where we would be in some beer festivals where I'd reach out to different breweries or people I kind of knew or had met along the way, like, hey, how can we have Block 15 in this? And so that was kind of cool. Just kind of building that networking and like, how far can I take this? And, you know, kind of, again, putting everything into, you know, it's somebody else's business, but I was excited about it and it was kind of fun. And I always looked at everything as a learning opportunity, even though I was like, yeah, I'm working, you know, long hours, kind of back to working my butt off again, but I was enjoying it. And so it was different than, you know, when I was working at Target, just like, you know, physical labor for 10 hours straight. It's not you know, grinding. It wasn't the same as like, now this I was more like mentally grinding where I'm always kind of, you know, was always on the clock. And part of the sales and distribution thing is, you know, there was always an account calling or texting or, you know, in the middle of the night, I'd wake up and have like all these messages like, oh, we need this beer, we need that. So you're always kind of on. But it was just a different kind of always working. I enjoyed that. Like, oh, it was a lot of like fixing problems too. Like, oh, this is, you know, this keg, you know, something's wrong with this or you know, we ran out of this beer or the misdeliveries here and just trying to figure it out, that kind of stuff. So it was just a very different kind of problem solving, but.
Yeah. They both involve working a lot, but it's more enjoyable when it's something you actually are passionate about.
And liking food and beer, I was going to all these cool places and trying some of the beers on there and trying some of the unique food people were making. So again, it was kind of growing my palate and like for what really cool cuisine was out there and more cool beer. And I think with working at Block and having that exposure, I really kind of started seeing just some of the amazing Oregon breweries that we had. And most of them like I'd never heard of until I was doing this. I was like, it kind of inspired me to, when we did open our taproom, to focus on all Oregon beer, you know, and that was one of the many reasons. You know, another reason is working in the beer industry and the kind of on that brewery side and kind of in a distribution role. I started really seeing some of the politics at play in the beer industry and just kind of some of that negativity, and so that helped me really lean to like, I want to focus on supporting small breweries and not, you know, open a taproom and just buy, you know, whatever is on the books. Like, no, I want to like really be intentional about everything we put on tap. So we kind of made the decision that to not go through any distributors because we just didn't want to play that game. And there was a lot of negativity that we didn't want to support. And we wanted to really focus on, let's get money directly to the breweries that not necessarily struggling, but they just aren't well known. And, you know, they make amazing beer. We didn't just pick any, you know, we were still very picky or are very picky about the beer we carry. But we very much seek out breweries in Oregon.
Could you explain to like me and anyone who doesn't know how traditionally it works with that distribution way? Yeah,
so it's kind of unique. So say, you know, breweries, they'll make beer and if they have a tap room, they'll kind of supply their tap room. They might send a keg out here and there, but eventually, if they really want to grow and start sending beer out everywhere, most breweries don't really have the ability to just start their own distribution, to start distributing beer. Because now you got to, you know, invest in vehicles and staff. It's a whole thing. And then sales. So Block 15 was very unique in the fact that they were doing that, but it was not very common. It's more common now, but it's not that common. And so what you end up doing is you reach out to a distributor, or distributors reach out to you. They have all the fleet of vehicles, and you would sell them the kegs, and then they would distribute them. But the challenge that comes with that is, you know, they take you generally 30% right off the top. So they take a huge percentage. But what's kind of unique, and I don't know all the details with like Oregon, but there are essentially these franchising laws that make it so if you sign with a distributor, it's almost impossible to get your rights back.
Really?
And so that's sometimes what has happened with some of these small breweries where they're all like, oh, yeah, we're growing and people want our beer. Let's just sign them up with the first distributor that seems like a good deal. And, they're really hot and they're popular. And then maybe for whatever reason, their brand kind of fizzles out or it, the market is so fickle, it changes so drastically that now it's something pivoted and nobody really is interested in their beer in this moment. So now the distributor's like, well, we're not really motivated to sell your beer, but we still own your rights. So you kind of get this thing where like the breweries have all this beer, but they can't sell it.
Oh, wow.
And so that's happened actually more often than you would like it to. And I just know some of the Oregon ones, and so I won't name names of breweries and distributors and all that, but
Of course.
you can look it up, and there's a lot of ones that have kind of fizzled out because of stuff like that. Wow. So it's really unfortunate that happens, and there's a lot of stuff that kind of goes with some of these distributors that are very negative, and so seeing that and. I can't speak for the owners of Block 15, but I feel like that was a big motivation for them choosing to self-distribute is they wanted that complete control over their brand. And so I was able to kind of learn, a lot about, self-distributing and seeing, other breweries that tried to self-distribute and the struggles they had, but then going with distributors. And that very much inspired us to be like, hey, I don't really want to, play that game, and I want to not support those distributors. I want to really directly support the breweries. And there's also a lot of amazing breweries that do go through distributors, and there's nothing wrong with that. They've been able to figure out how to make that model work, but they're also not necessarily the breweries that need help. Like they're doing fine.
Right.
They're pretty big breweries, and so they're doing okay. So we're like, let's make sure we're focusing on the small breweries, and it also made it because there's so much beer out there, and there's so much. It's like overwhelming, and even being when I was with Block 15 the sales, a lot of my job was learning about like what's out there, and I needed to know the market really well and kind of know what the competition was, what other breweries are out there. And so with that, it was like it's overwhelming. And talking to taprooms, like I don't know how you guys like keep track of all this. And a lot of them was like it's hard. Like a lot of times we don't. That's why is he just like whatever the distributor sends us, we just take those beers. The focusing on just Oregon breweries, it kind of made my job easier. I don't have to think about what breweries are the new hot breweries in every state that I might be distributed here that I want to try to carry to stay on top of, because that's people come out, they want the newest thing for beer. For me, I only had to focus on Oregon, and then I chose, since it's only local independent breweries, it's a very small amount of Oregon beer that I have to focus on. So that gave me the ability to have really cool tap lists that is full of beer that people mostly haven't heard of, and it's all amazing beer. And then since I wasn't spending all this time trying to learn about all these breweries out of state, I could really focus on anytime a new brewery's coming out, researching. So a lot of times a new brewery would open, and I'd be one of the first people to reach out to them to go visit them, try their beer, and be like, hey, let's bring you on before people even knew that they existed. And so that was pretty fun. And being with Block 15 for a long time, I built those connections with other breweries that when we were opened, I was able to right away reach out to all these breweries that I knew in Oregon that didn't really distribute, that were kind of hard to get a hold of. And so we were able to open common fields with all these beers that people were like, how did you get this stuff? Because, you can't get this. They're so small and so high demand. So that really helped.
So you're kind of teasing this whole time about like how you have the building blocks to common fields. Is that what was next for you after Block? Yeah.
So that's pretty much what we jumped into. At this time, we had moved from the house that we had bought originally, and we were renting it out. We had kind of fixed it all. It was kind of funny because it's one of those things you spend 10 years fixing up a house, and it's finally like, it's nice, then you move out. And then now somebody else gets to enjoy it. But we were renting it out for a while, and we'd moved kind of more North Corvallis up by the hospital. Just needed a little bit bigger house, but also with having kids now growing up, we wanted them to be kind of closer to schools where they could be in a neighborhood they could walk to school and stuff. And so with starting Common Fields, part of that, we invested so much in this house that was a fixer-upper. We were able to sell that and use all of the revenue essentially from that to invest in Common Fields. So to buy a piece of property, put a good down payment on a piece of property, and then use the rest of the money to kind of pay for the build-outs. And one thing that also was kind of took us a long time to start a business is we didn't want to rent just from a landlord. We just, seeing distributors, the issues with that with breweries, but also like, hearing stories of restaurants that are doing really well and all of a sudden they're kicked out. Like we just didn't, if we're going to invest everything, our life savings, everything into this, we didn't want to 3 years later be like, oh, the landlord decided to sell and now we're out of everything.
Right.
So that was always kind of, we're going to take the time to do this right. And that was one of the things for us, was like, to do it right, we need to own the property. So that it created a lot of challenges, because like, who can do that? Like, how are you able to, there's not a lot of places that can do that.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of why, of the many things we're always thinking of, like the back of our head, that the rental property, that property we're fixing up, was like, when we can sell this, like, let's, hopefully that's the money. And we were luckily, we were able to sell for more than 4 times what we paid for it.
Yeah.
Because we bought it dirt cheap, and then we were able to sell on a pretty high. And even when we sold it for a good deal, because we actually sold some friends, but we didn't go through any realtors. We did that kind of self-listing, so we didn't have to pay for all that. And we just wanted to be like, hey, we know who's going to buy it. We're going to just kind of do a simple sale. And that just gave us that much more revenue to invest in common fields.
Gotcha. It sounds like the idea for common fields was brewing for many years.
It was, and it changed kind of the iteration of what it was going to be. It was like, oh, maybe we'll just, a place where I could. At one point, it was like, I'm just going to park, because at this point I only had one food truck. So I was like, we'll park our food truck, and it'll be like a coffee drive-up type thing where people will just drive up to your food truck window.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was like, well, maybe we'll add a little tap room to it. So as I started learning more over the years, I just started to evolve. Like, oh, now we can add a tap room.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe we'll do it here. Maybe we'll add this, or maybe we'll have multiple trucks.
Yeah, but the idea marinates, and as it marinates,
changes.
Yeah, it changes. Yeah.
It always was still kind of the same idea, but it just evolved. And
was it like a single sweeping motion where you pulled the trigger on, like, we're going to do this common fields, and you quit your job at Block 15?
Yeah, it was kind of one of those, when working at Block 15, because any place I worked, I always wanted to work for a couple of years, but I would start to get that burnout point where I was like, okay, I'm kind of done with this. I'm ready to move on. I don't feel like I'm learning anymore. And with Block 15, it was different. I was there for 8 years, and I was kept evolving. I kept changing my roles, and I really saw, probably about halfway through my Block 15 position, I was like, this is probably the place I'm going to, there's no reason to move anywhere else. I loved where I was working. It's like, I'm not going to leave here until I start my own thing. So that was kind of in my head. It's like, I'm going to be here, maybe forever, but whenever I do leave, it's not going to be to jump to ship to another job. The only thing that would be better than this is to start my own business.
Right. So it's like,
so once I made that mindset, that kind of conscious decision, I was like, well, maybe I need to start my own business now.
Yeah.
And so then I started thinking that. And then, eventually, like, it was about 2 years before I left Block 15, I had really made that decision, like, yeah, let's do that. So let's start actively looking.
Okay.
And, there are a lot of limitations on where we can really do a food truck in Corvallis. So we had a very small kind of a downtown area that we could open something in. So me and my wife, we just started going to every single business, taking pictures, saying like, okay, is this a place that we could open our spot? Not knowing what was for sale, because for commercial listings, most of it's not listed publicly.
Oh, how do you?
You have to like look on commercial websites, and a lot of times you get we didn't know this now, but you would get like a commercial real estate agent, and they have like access to all this stuff. So a lot of it's not super public.
Gotcha.
But we went up and down the downtown, which there's about 8 or 9 blocks that you're allowed to do food trucks.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think we found maybe 5 places that would potentially be something that would work for our place. And really, we were looking for an older building that had like an outside parking lot, that had like a little small inside place, things like gas stations or mechanic shops, or just kind of weird little places that we could easily convert. We wanted to buy property that had an existing building,
Mm-hmm.
but it was something that was like not really being utilized. Really trying to look for like kind of hidden potential.
I was just going to say, is this because it's of the money aspect of just like that would be more affordable to get
the
into?
money and it just kind of for our vision, we want it to be kind of unique, and it's just like, okay, what can we turn this, what we wanted to turn Common Fields into, an old mechanic shop, an old building kind of lend itself, because we're also thinking we need it to be, we don't want a big wooden structure that maybe is old and has like all these issues with like dry rot or roof leaks or all the stuff. So like a steel building, is going to be in probably a lot better shape. Yeah, financially we had a pretty small budget, so we're like, what can we find that is in our budget? We have to be able to put a decent down payment on the property, but then also still have enough money to do the build out.
Mm-hmm.
So something that was pretty much ready. All we had to do was like aesthetics. We had to do some painting and stuff like that. So that was kind of what we were looking for. And then we wanted a decent outside space so we could park food trucks. And other than like a gas station, there aren't places that just have like a building and a lot of outside parking. So that's kind of what drew us to that style of building. And then, we took pictures of all those places, and then we just went online and started looking. And the only one of the 5 that was for sale was the lot we we picked. And then we looked, it's like, oh, this has been on the market for like 6-7 years, like quite a while. But again, because there's an existing business there, and there's nothing listing that it's for sale.
And what was
Phil's transmission was the one that was there, and he'd been there for 30 years, and he was kind of had reached that retirement stage, and so like then once it was for sale, he was like, as soon as it sells, that's when I retire.
Okay, so the business that was still operating.
Still operating, yeah.
Okay.
So he was doing his transmission thing. He'd been doing that for 30 years. And so that was kind of the property. We're like, okay, this is the one that has potential. So we reached out to the agent and we started doing visits, and we met Phil, and we kind of talked to him through like, hey, what are issues with the property? What's this? Wanted to know. And, he was saying, okay, their building had a lot of problems, but ultimately really didn't have near as many as a lot could. And, they're all things that were kind of fixable, but like the roof leaked, and, it was a very unique piece of property. So we probably had 6 months of meeting going there. Also, the other thing is part of taking the sale over is we wanted to make sure our business was viable. We didn't want to buy a place and then have the city be like, you can't even build this. You can't even do any of this. So, part of that 6+ months, it was probably more like 9 actually. It's kind of all blur, but we were meeting with the city probably weekly, and we were presenting our plans and like, this is what we want to do, and talk through. And because we're starting a new business, there's, changing the use of the space. So that's a lot of work to kind of figure out and to do it affordably. But also like food trucks are new to Corvallis. Corvallis doesn't really have, there aren't, the ordinance are set up, there really aren't places to do food trucks. And yeah, we were allowed to in the downtown area, but there was no, like, the book didn't have like, hey, these are the rules we follow. This is what we need to do for food trucks. So it was kind of like, we kind of felt like we had to reinvent everything there. So we had to do a lot of research that other cities were doing, and then bring them to Corvallis and be like, hey, this is close to what we're trying to do. So we're trying to figure out like, what the traffic counts are going to be. And there's all these things we had to figure out because we were changing the use of the space from a mechanic shop to a food truck pod, that you have to kind of figure out, like, do we need to build like new right of ways with like the sidewalks? And there's a lot of that to figure out. And it's like, I mean, I could literally spend hours talking about it, but it would bore everybody, and I'm already bored talking about it.
I could see how the 6-9 months could blur together.
It just all blurs. And
yeah.
But it was really nice because we were able to go in person and talk to the city. And so I was able to, like sometimes 2 or 3 times a week, it's like, hey, I don't understand this. Yeah. And they would talk me through it. And it was because there's just so much like just reading and stuff. I was like, I don't know what any of this means. But you would talk, it's like, oh, that makes sense. That makes sense.
Yeah.
And so we started doing like meetings with the fire department, the city planner, and like kind of building, what Colin feels is going to be. It's like, okay. And then they were describing, explaining the hurdles we were going to have to jump. They was like, okay, this doesn't make sense. So we would go back and we think about it. It's like, how do we get around this? And then we're like, oh, we come up with an idea. It's like, maybe this works. So we presented it different to the city. And they're like, okay, yeah, that works, but this thing now doesn't. So it was a lot of this back and forth. And eventually we came up to this kind of thing. It's like, okay, now we know we have solutions to all the hurdles to opening this place. They basically said, yes, if you do these things, this will work. This will all work. You're not going to get, because of this, you won't get charged a whole bunch of extra money.
Was there any point in this when you were just like getting burnt out and you're just like, you know what? Let's not even try. I'll just,
I think like
block 15. I'm happy.
If it was like me now, yes, I would be burnt out. But at the time, we had so much energy and excitement that we're like, that we don't, like, there is no failure. We're going to push through this. We're going to figure it out no matter what. Like, this has to work. So we just had a lot of energy, and we were like, no, we're going to make it work. So I don't feel like burnout was an option then. Like, now I look back and I was like, I don't know how I did it. Like, with myself now, because we've been through so much, I'm like, you kind of get to where like, that was crazy that we went through all that.
Yeah.
But, we had the energy, and we were so excited to start this new place, and we're still excited about it now, but it's different from when you're like, it doesn't exist yet, and you're like putting all your energy into this kind of dream essentially that you've wanted to, starting your own business, and kind of that passion behind it. So yeah, we didn't mind. They're like, okay, let's canvas. Like, we would go sit out in the car and do car counting, like in front of the property, to see if the car counts were accurate, because there's a lot of like changing use, like how much traffic would you generate there, and then based on that you have to pay fees to the city for like the trip fees, and that goes to like, maintaining roads and stuff. But there's all this stuff that you have to do.
Yeah.
And so we wanted, but because there was nothing in place for food trucks, like at least the city didn't have, and even Oregon in general, food trucks are relatively new. They haven't been around forever. But Corvallis, we were the first ones really doing that. So it being all new, and they didn't have anything on the books to like, hey, you need to do exactly this for it to work. we had to go and figure it out. So we would meet with different engineers, and they would give us advice and like, hey, this is the kind of thing you could do. You could pay me a bunch of money to do it, or one engineer just said, go sit out there and count cars. It's going to be kind of a bummer. You're not going to enjoy doing it. You know, it's going to seem like a waste of time, but it's a lot better than paying me like $5,000 or $6,000 to have do a whole analysis thing.
Right.
So we did a lot of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then when we finally made that kind of presentation to the city, we had all this information, and they were like, okay, yeah, that'll work. And we had to do a lot of these kind of creative things because, again, kind of reiterating, there wasn't like, oh, for food trucks, this is exactly the model. Like, say, this giant book of all these things based on every business, and there was nothing really for food trucks.
Yeah, so you're kind of...
So we had to kind of figure out, like, well, it's kind of a hybrid of this and that. And then we're looking at the existing business and, like, what the traffic counts would be. But you had to, like, based on, like, okay, well, there's so many garage doors and how much traffic goes to their business. And then, like, we couldn't have the traffic change too much. And if it did, it'd be fine. But then we would have to basically trigger kind of a whole other series of change of use, like things that would make us potentially have to change maybe the entrances. So, like, I guess with the property, some things that were kind of unique about it that ended up getting kind of grandfathered in because the change of use wasn't so drastic. The building is built on the property line. That's one thing. The entrances are too close to intersection. So things like that, if we basically showed that the new business we're building was going to generate so much more traffic than the existing one, we would have to go through the process of now petitioning not to change all those things. And so that could have put us in like a 2 to 3 year limbo of like kind of paperwork and bureaucracy that we were trying to avoid all that.
Right, yeah.
And the city was even kind of assuring us, like, ultimately, you're probably not going to have to change that, but you're going to have to go through the process of, petitioning it or whatever that ends up being. So we were trying to avoid all that. So that's where a lot of that kind of work went into, like, okay, we got to be creative and how can we word things. One thing is we couldn't invest so much money on the property because if we did too much in the build out, it would trigger kind of this same change of use thing that now we would have to go and go through that process and petition those changes. Essentially, we had to get creative with kind of how we spent our money on it. So what we did is when we bought the place, we bought an auto shop and we invested some of the basically the really big expenses. We went to fixing up the auto shop. So we hadn't triggered the change of use yet. We redid all the electrical and we redid all the plumbing, but we were just fixing up an auto shop that we bought.
Yeah.
And then once that was like the chunk of the money, the rest was all just small aesthetic stuff that we didn't have to have like big city inspections and permitting for. Then we were like, okay, now let's apply for this new permit. And now once we applied, we had a very small chunk of money we could spend on the property.
Wow. Okay. So you had to get creative.
So there's a lot of creative things we had to do with that. Also because like we were keeping the property and it was a weird thing where the building was actually like negative value, that the property was worth more without the building because it was like buildable, developable property, but with the building on it was less. So it was hard to figure out the amount of money we could spend because it was all based on a percentage of the value of the building, but the building was negative. So that made that was another creative thing we had to get. So we had to basically work around with an engineer to like how much would it cost to rebuild this building since we were buying it and the value to us was the building on it, included the building. And anyways, it was just, we had to get, there was a lot of creative stuff like that. And it just, again, it was 9 months of figuring that stuff out. And
in this 9-month period, I'm assuming this sounds like due diligence stuff. You haven't
it was all due diligence. We hadn't purchased yet. We were figuring, before we wanted to pull the trigger, we wanted to 100% sure we weren't, because I don't know anything about commercial real estate. I don't know about a lot of that stuff. And this is our first time, we'd done a lot of business and, we knew all about restaurant industry, but I didn't know anything about permitting and working with the city and all this kind of stuff. So this was all brand new. So we wanted to really make sure that we knew what we were getting into and we weren't like, oh yeah, that they said it's okay, so we'll just do it. And then find out later, like, oh no, that's totally not. And we're going to be,
so
in trouble. So
you made your way through all the bureaucracy and rules and stuff, and then you purchased it.
So then we purchased it. And so, yes. And so at this point, once we knew we were going to purchase it, and once we pulled the trigger and purchased it, and it was also interesting negotiating back and forth because we'd never done commercial purchasing, and it's a whole other monster compared to just you buy a house that's listed, you buy it, and like make an offer to do it. It was so much more like cutthroat back and forth, and it was just I wasn't expecting that. So that was unique. But so we ended up purchasing the property, and then once we had like officially closed on it, That's when we let Block 15 know, like, hey, yeah, we are doing this. And so at this point, we hadn't told really anybody. Nobody knew that we were
didn't know
doing
you're sneaking off after hours
Yeah.
in the weekend. Not
doing this,
sneaking
which
off,
is,
but yeah.
but we weren't like being, because,
No, yeah.
you had to, I didn't want to, because you didn't know what if it falls through. And
Yeah, you don't want to spook anyone.
But we also wanted to make sure we gave plenty of notice, because I wanted to give Block 15 lots of notice. And, once we had purchased the property, we knew there's going to be, a build out period. So kind of during that build out period, and even before that, there was still, we needed a lot of time to have, Phil to slowly close his business down and move his stuff out, because there's a lot of stuff there. So we had like a 90 days where we had kind of did this co-occupants thing, which was kind of unique, where he was still doing business and I was doing I had contractors out there doing some of the major, like some of the things that didn't really disrupt his business, like looking at there's some trees that had to be taken out because of where they were dead, and like looking at the electrical and plumbing and some of those things that were bigger projects that needed to be done, but they were just kind of out there and figuring some of that stuff out that we weren't doing the full, hey, we're moving in and doing the build out, but getting some of those things done. Those same 90 days was kind of the notice we gave Block 15, and I was also working a block, and I'd come after work, or I would do a lot of computer works, so I would go park at what is now Common Fields, and do my lab, work on the laptop, and then I'd meet a contractor out and we'd show around, like, okay, we're plowing this out and map it out. Because a lot of it was like, okay, we got to make sure we have all this budgeted. So it was definitely those 90 days of doing busyness and just doing a lot of things. And
oh yeah, sounds stressful just hearing about it.
It was a lot of work.
But it worked out. You transitioned. Phil moved out.
Yeah, Phil kind of got out, moved out,
and then you started doing the build out internally.
Yeah. So at this point, we had the big electricians, and we had they started like they gutted all the plumbing, and they kind of gutted electrical, and that was all redone, and we put new sewer stuff in, because that was really the only thing wrong with the building. It was like all the piping was rusted out and all the wiring was old. But the building structure was great. So we got that done, and right about that time is kind of when the pandemic hit. Ooh, and that was kind of that next big kind of wrench thrown at us, because we had already scheduled out, fence and all this construction to be done. And essentially and we were also still connected, with the city. So every week or two, I was still going with the city, making sure we were doing it the right way, and we were, we knew what we were doing, and kind of, and there's still lots to learn. So having that open dialogue was really important with the city. And then when the pandemic hit, it kind of shut all that down, where now, everybody was in fear and, didn't know what was going on. But, contractors didn't want to come out and work. So we, lost all of our contractors doing anything on the property. Yeah. And also nobody was doing anything in person. So we had no in-person meetings with the city anymore. So I kind of lost that connection too. So we were kind of in the dark, like, what do we do? We had just we were barely a month into starting our kind of build out.
That's terrifying.
And we kind of like, I don't know what we're doing. But also in the pandemic, everybody's stuck at home. And we're like, well, I guess we'll just start doing it ourselves as much as we can. So we, were able to use that time when everybody's kind of cooped up. We were cooped up at our property, in this big open space. So our kids kind of, we had our small circle of, 2 or 3 families. And so they all just hung out there. They had a place they could be, because nobody could really go outside. But we had this parking lot. So they're doing their schoolwork there and playing with their friends. And then we had those same families, we'd all do dinner together there, and then we'd be painting the building together, or we'd be doing this. So we basically just kind of took on like, hey, we got to do all the construction ourselves, because, at this point we had no idea how long it was going to last, and it still lasted longer than at the time we thought it would. But, we also had these very ambitious build-out plans. Like we gave ourselves, 90 days from when we were starting the build-out to get all the construction done. Mm-hmm. Because, when you have loans and all this stuff, it's like the longer you're closed, you're not making money. We want to be open and start making money. Mm-hmm. So we'd only budgeted so long. And now with not having contractors doing ourselves, that 90 days real quick went to like 6 months to 9 months, it went a lot longer. So that was kind of the next big hurdle was like, we're doing it all ourselves. Yeah. And then also not knowing a lot of stuff because we didn't have that open dialogue with the city. We started bumping into these hurdles. We're like, oh, we didn't know we had to do this differently. And we had to redo things, or, we'd have the plumbing inspector come out a few times and had us completely redo stuff because it wasn't done right. So there was just a lot of extra hurdles kind of during that time.
Yeah. Wow. It sounds like it's too late to throw in the hat because we've
already put everything into it. So now we're figuring it out. And
really, really bad timing.
Yeah. So essentially it kind of stretched out that opening a lot longer. And at this point, too, all the businesses are closed, so other ones are struggling. My friend Dave, and now taproom manager, he had lost his job too from the pandemic, so he's just started coming out and helping us, and it was. He kind of became part of our little bubble, I guess. But then at the time he officially really lost his job, we were like, "Hey, you want a job at our place?" Because he'd already been working with us for a long time, do the construction, and I'd known him for a while in the beer industry, as a salesperson. So, I knew his work ethics. I was like, he would be a great fit, but he had already worked somewhere. But now that he didn't, I was like, well, we're gonna snatch you up and have you as our taproom manager. So then through the build out, he kind of helped. The planning with us and what we thought Common Field should be. And he had definitely a lot more front of house experience than any of us did. So we were able to learn a lot kind of from that and help us really build on kind of what the front of house should be. Because we knew all the things about back of house and kitchen. But I had very limited experience working front of house. I had definitely some, but not on the level that he did. So it was nice to have kind of a veteran jump in and help kind of build the front of house side of Common Fields.
Yeah, especially one that you've had that prior relationship with.
Yeah.
And so today, I'm sure there's more details between like those early starting days and today, but what does your day look like now?
For me, like kind of the day-to-day is, I'm generally there Monday through Friday. I'm going to be there doing a lot of the computer work, kind of back to what reminiscent of kind of some of the stuff I was doing at Block 15, but now, we've grown to where, I probably get 50 to 100 emails a day, and it's going to be, people wanting a reservation, beer sales, event we're doing, what kind of this. So I spend probably the first half kind of coming in, checking out things. We're also, do all of our own, we do a lot of marketing and design work, and so I've kind of taken on a lot of those roles. So we're always updating menus. If we have an event, we do all of our in-house like signs and stuff. So there's a lot of kind of those assets, creating a lot of branding.
So you're doing graphic design now too.
I do. I kind of taught myself graphic design to figure that out, because as we've kind of evolved as a, kind of jumping this, to where we are now, looking back at, again, using Block 15 as an example, because I did learn a lot from there, seeing how they kind of grew. It was a longer growth, but into having like a marketing director and just, I saw the importance of good branding and having good awareness as, websites and, Facebook presence and all the social media. So jumping into Common Fields, I always wanted that. And working next to one, I kind of knew, I didn't know how to do any of it, but I just saw the importance of, working in a desk next to the marketing director at Block 15. I was like, okay, I can see why these are important. So, I just took it upon myself to kind of learn how to do all that and figure it out. And it's definitely, I'm still learning, and I'm still, I think it's been 6 months using like Adobe and trying to figure out like some of the more design stuff. And I have a long ways to go, but I was definitely have learned how to do a lot of things I didn't expect to learn how to do, with doing the actual graphic design and building posters and coming up with all that has been a lot.
I bet. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I do a lot of that stuff, so I'm very familiar. Is that something you enjoy enough that you're going to continue to do that, or you're going to try and outsource that and delegate?
It's kind of interesting, because it's like I do and I don't. Like I enjoy being behind the bar. Like that's kind of my favorite, or the cooking. I mean, I really like all of it. I think if I'm stuck just doing one thing all the time, it's a lot. So if I'm just stuck, 10 hours just doing design work, and I think for me, because I don't know it that well, it takes me longer. But I enjoy the creativity of it. I enjoy like, hey, here's my vision, and then I can make it, as opposed to like if I had having somebody else do it, here's my vision, and maybe they don't do it quite the way I want, but it still looks good. So then I'm having this compromise, like, oh, it's fine. But doing it myself, it's like, this is the way I want it to be. And then playing around, it's kind of seeing the progress. So I'm also very much like, if I tell somebody else to do something, I want to make sure I know how to do it, because I don't want to have unrealistic expectations. So which is kind of cool with Common Fields is, me and my wife as owners, like we make sure that we know how to do every job, every part of Common Fields. So if there's a problem with the kitchen, or we're telling them, hey, why did you do this wrong, or whatever issue there might be, we've actually worked the kitchen. We know every in and out of it, so we know how long it should take, or if there's a problem, we understand. We can like kind of sympathize, like, oh yeah, I see how that would be a problem, because we could put ourselves in those shoes. Same with like front of house. We want to know like really anything that there is with Common Fields, we want to make sure that we're not creating unrealistic expectations. So us being involved in it all kind of helps to know, like, oh yeah, this would take 10 hours to design this one asset.
Right.
Because I've done it, or,
Helps with the management of.
Yeah.
Was there like just a slowly growing desire to have this, like, your own business, or is that something early on in your like career when you work in the restaurant industry where you're like,
I feel like I've always wanted to own my own business. I mean, as a kid, I have stories, and actually it's kind of funny. In like elementary school, I started my own little business. I had like a bracelet making business, and I would have other elementary kids make bracelets for me. But I got in trouble at school because like I was the one selling them all, making the money, but I basically had all these kids making bracelets for me. So, my parents would tell me this story of like the early days of me selling stuff in school and wanting to have like this kind of business thing. And in middle school, I would buy candy and contraband, candies and sodas. I went to like kind of a more private school and sell them on my locker because they weren't allowed to be in school. And so things like that, just kind of like, always had like a business kind of thing. So my parents would be like, yeah, you've always wanted to start your own business. And so, I never knew what that was. And, as a kid, it changes. Like, I want to do this. I like video games now. I want to start a video game. I love, doing this thing. I want to start a business doing this. And so it kind of evolved.
Gotcha. Well, you certainly sound like your working career, one thing stands out is like your work ethic is just, very high. So the high work ethic along with like wanting to have your own thing led your path to a self-employed one.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's fun to, I think just working, when you work really hard and then you work for other people, it's rewarding as long as they're like, valuing that hard work. And even, a place can value the hard work, but if you have that drive to do your own thing, eventually you're going to want to do that. You can only want to do it for somebody else for so long.
Right.
Even if they are like really appreciative of it and they're a great place to work.
What do you see in the future? Do you have bigger plans for Common Fields or other plans? Or?
Yeah, we're always kind of looking to grow. And honestly, Common Fields is it's so different than kind of what we had originally visioned. So right now, I think we're just kind of playing catch up with all the growth. I guess when we officially opened, we'd gone through all the hurdles with the city, and we're like, hey, now this is going to be kind of our official open date. And then I maybe mentioned a little bit, we had like we had all the fires that happened. And kind of the smoke rolled in on our grand opening day, so that shut us down.
Wildlife fires,
that
with smoke. Yeah,
that kind of shut us down again. And we were kind of playing now this game where we'd be open and close, because we kind of had gotten to where like we could be open, but the pandemic now wouldn't let us be opened. So that kind of created hurdles. So that kind of had us redesign a lot of this outside seating where we designed those heated benches and stuff. But so we did finally open, and we were like, we're going to open. Just assume we're never going to have inside, and we're going to just basically make this really nice outside dining. But at this point, we'd been open and closed so much, and kind of the community knew that we were trying to be open, and we were getting a lot of patronage. So by the time we did open, we just were right off the bat busy. And then kind of from there, we were kind of just hit the ground running, and we were just so busy, and we were growing almost faster than we could handle, which was great. But it was also like, we were a small business with a very small amount of money. And to have that kind of growth so fast, it created challenges where we were, all the money we made, we were reinvesting in the place, which is great. And that's kind of what has helped make Common Fields what it is now we have this amazing infrastructure. But it wasn't like here's the budget we had, and we're building this infrastructure, and then we're opening a business. We were like reinvesting it all to kind of being like, okay, we're riding this, we're busy because of the pandemic, but like we also don't want to stop evolving because we're having all these other hurdles thrown at us. So like, okay, now let's invest in this, we're ultimately building Common Fields out to what it is now. But at the time, we were doing it just to stay ahead of like the pandemic and ahead of closing, essentially. We're busy. Like, if we want to keep up this momentum, we need to invest in this. We need to do this. Now we need to change this. We have to pivot this.
Yeah.
And the challenge too, like, because we were a new business, we didn't qualify for any grants of any kind or any of the pandemic assistance.
Oh, wow.
And so that was a huge thing that like these other businesses were getting those. And even with that, they were still really struggling, but we didn't have any of that. So we had to really get creative kind of with what we were doing.
Did you have any outside capital that you were able to grab, or is it you're still just?
I mean, not really. We had some loans. We could take out some. We definitely had to take out some extra loans, but it was really, we were lucky that when we did open, the demand was there for our place. Like, people got it because we had been this kind of open close, and we had people coming in really excited about our place. So we were kind of building this following when we weren't really opened. And our vision with Common Fields was like looking at all the things that we thought Corvallis needed at the time. We were passionate about beer and food, but like what else do we want to put in this place? We making it very family friendly, so having a like play area, being very dog friendly, having this outside space. And we were like, Corvallis is so like such a dog like focused town, and dogs kind of really part of people's families. But there really aren't that many dog-friendly restaurants around. I mean, it just isn't something that's done. So one of the things working with actually the health department is making sure that we could actually have dogs inside our building. And so we kind of got, that figured out. And that was something that, I think even to this day, there's no restaurants in town that allow dogs inside other than us. And so looking at all these little details that we thought Corvallis was lacking in, and we kind of put it all into our business. And I think because of all that, when people saw the place, like, this place is amazing. There's live music. We can have our dogs here. It's family friendly. We wanted to make a place that was a drinking establishment that didn't feel like a drinking establishment. So you could have kids running around playing, and you could have a college student having fun, but it didn't feel like, you were in this place like a kids play area. It didn't feel.
No one felt like an outsider.
Yeah, if everybody felt welcome, and that was kind of just really trying to figure out like how can we make it welcoming, inclusive. And so all these little elements and details we kind of put in this place. And it was funny because a lot of people on the outside before we did this, like, oh, that's crazy. Why would you do this? This doesn't make sense. You're really going to do this? And all these little weird ideas, but they all kind of came together as Common Fields. And I think that's what people really appreciate about the place is it's so different than everything else. And there's almost like so much going on that it seems like it would be overwhelming, but somehow it's not. Somehow you come and there's just always something going on. It's welcome, inviting. It doesn't feel like too much.
Yeah, I can attest to that. Yeah.
I think that really kind of going back to with the funding and all that, we were so busy off the bat. It was like overwhelming how busy we were. We're like, because we grew so much faster than a business generally does, and like you really know how to kind of keep up with. We're like, okay, we got to add this infrastructure. We got to hire employees. We got to do this. So now we're working more than we ever have between me, Cherish, and Dave, and our staff. It was like we were joking about putting beds there because we literally would be sleeping. We had a couch in the office and we'd sleep for 3 or 4 hours and then get back and keep working. And it was just, It was kind of chaos those first couple of years of like, it was a good chaos. And we were all like riding on this high of like, we're so busy and we're evolving. This is going to be such an amazing place. But oh my gosh, we're exhausted. And also like said all the revenue came in. It's like, okay, we can finally now invest. It's like we'd have a week of really good sales. Now we can invest in building this thing that we really need. Or, it's raining and we don't have, just whatever it was, infrastructure we need to do. So we've become what we are based on all of our patrons and all the support we've gotten from people. And we've been able to kind of evolve our business. And, our focus is on, that community space. So having the live music and doing a lot of these events has been fun, and being able to really do a lot of charity work and support like charities through Common Fields to kind of give back to the community that's really supported us. So we want to kind of continue to grow there and really looking at the key points that people see for us. Like, we're dog friendly, we're this, we're that, like, instead of just growing, like honing in on those points and how can we be more dog friendly? How can we be more family friendly? How can we do this more? How can we grow our cuisine more? And I think right now that kind of going into the next couple of years is developing the cuisine of the trucks that we have. With the pop-up, trying to build some more. We have the poke, and as I said, we'd want to do some other stuff in there. We're working on always new menus and between the German and the Mediterranean, which are the other 2 trucks that we own, just kind of evolving. And with Kalamata Bistro, we've had that for so long, so it's really kind of a tried and true menu. Haven't had to evolve it too much, but all the other cuisine is pretty new to us starting Common Fields. So we're really wanting to invest and continue to grow that and find get feedback from staff or from customers, like what do you like, what don't you like. Continue to grow with intention, but also kind of like slowing down a bit because we've been kind of this like, going 1,000 miles an hour. Let's slow things down a bit and continue to grow, but like at a slower pace and try to catch up from all of the growth now that we've had. The level we were growing isn't sustainable for business, and we don't want to get to the point where we just are continuing that, and all of a sudden you fail because you're just constantly investing and you aren't getting much out of that.
Right. Well, it sounds like you're quite intentional and self-reflective of both what you're trying to build in relation to your patrons, and then also the business itself, not trying to implode from being full throttle for too long.
Yeah. Circling back and answer your question about the future is like it's hard to look at because where we are now is like where when we first started, we maybe 10, 15 years we picture ourselves. So we've gone so far that it's like now we've kind of looked ahead, but we're it's behind
us.
It's behind us. So we looked ahead. So we're just trying to kind of maintain and focus on paying off a lot of the debt that we incurred getting to where we are now. And we joke about like half of our job was just construction, building this, building that the whole time, because we kind of got used to it when we did the build ourselves, that we just continued that into all the rest of our stuff. It saved us money, but we were able to design and build things the way we wanted to.
Yeah.
What's kind of unique that really, when you look at Common Fields, almost everything there was built and designed by me, Dave, or Cherish. So.
Wow. That's incredible. Yeah, especially now knowing all the other behind the scenes of what was involved, all the paperwork and the working with the city and all that. But yeah, you've really like had your hands in everything.
Yep.
Yeah. It sounds like it's thriving and it's going well. You're ahead of schedule, as you put it. So it seems like a silly question to ask if you'd ever like consider going back to working for someone else based off what you told me. I could assume the answer.
Yeah.
But I have to ask.
I mean, there are definitely times you're like, I wouldn't say I'd ever want to go back, but you look at like, oh yeah, it was a lot simpler not having to run a business, especially a business as big as ours and as many like working parts where like, occasionally, like I kind of miss the days where like I could just go home and check out, but I'm like I still would never trade anything to go back because it's the passion of what you do, and it's it's still at the end of the day it's like okay, yeah, it's exhausting, a lot of work, but it's our place, and it's like I don't know, I've never had the points because even when you have a good job, you always have the times where you wake up it's like oh I dread going to work, I really don't want to, and everybody's kind of got that, and it's like oh I got to go to work, it's the work week starts, like. And who knows, maybe it'll change as we get older, but like it hasn't happened with Common Fields. We're like, oh, yeah, we want to be home and stuff with our family, but it's like, yep, work doesn't, I never once woke up like, oh, I got to go to work. It's like, I usually get up earlier because I need to go to work sooner because I have more I want to do and more stuff to get done. But it's like, I'm never like, oh, I don't really want to go to work. I always end up going to work sooner and working longer than I probably should.
Yeah. Do you give yourself vacations or is it not?
We kind of try to, and that's really, so I guess like, going to like what our goal is to grow Common Fields, I think is really now how can we step back more and try to give ourselves more vacation. And when we're still a new business, it's funny because we haven't even really technically been open 3 years yet. But it feels like we've been open a lifetime just with how much we've grown and how much we've been through.
Sure.
So we kind of have to make ourselves take vacations, I guess. And so I think as we have been open longer, it'll become an easier thing to do to step away more. But we are still, within 3 years, you're still pretty much there every day and still figuring, there's a lot we're figuring out. I mean, I think kind of where we are growth-wise now is we're looking at all of the different events we've done, all the things we've done, and kind of honing that in, like what works, what doesn't work. We've kind of say yes to everything. So like, we do a lot of charity stuff, we do a lot of events, and we just want to say yes to see how it works. And so now we're kind of getting to like, we know what works and what doesn't. So less saying yes and kind of like, okay, we know these work. Let's really focus on things that do. And then there's things that like, we've always wanted to do this, but it still just doesn't work out. So like, how can we either figure out how to make it work or just like maybe that doesn't work anymore. Like comedy is a good example. We've tried to like do comedy shows at our place, and it just, because we're not a late night spots, it just has never really quite worked out to be something that makes sense at Common Fields.
Yeah, actually, that brings me to a question I want to ask.
Yeah.
As someone who's like goes there every now and then, like I've always wondered why you guys don't stay open later, because it seems like there would be plenty of demand.
Totally. It was interesting. So when we first started Common Fields, one of our goals was we wanted to be a place that was not open late. And so part of that was, being a family-friendly establishment. Once you're open so late, you can't have kids there. And so it changes that dynamic. And, part of why we don't do hard alcohol, we wanted to keep that a very family-friendly. Some of the licensing and dealing with like permits and stuff and insurance, there's a big factor there. Really just having that vibe of like being family-friendly lend itself more to an earlier thing. And once you start having a drinking establishment after, 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night, the dynamic changes and you start dealing with a little more of like the negative part of the drinking establishment. So more people you maybe have to cut off, more, fights, more of that kind of stuff happens at night. It doesn't happen during the day. So we wanted to really not ever have to deal with that, and we didn't want that to be our place. So not eliminating hard liquor, that was a real easy way. And I like hard liquor, but I know having that at your establishment, it's really kind of, that's where people can really easily overdrink. Our internal policies around alcohol are stricter than what OLCC is, and that's kind of really our approach to really anything we do is if there's an organization that regulates us, we want our policies to be stricter. that way we're never going to get in trouble, but we also want to be, just, do our own due diligence, I guess.
Yeah. And it's all part of building the atmosphere.
Building the atmosphere to be a family-friendly place. And I think because of all these things, I think I can't even count on one hand the amount of the times we've had to cut somebody off or kick someone out in 3 years. When most establishments that are drinking, even like places that are trying to be family-friendly, you open later, they have that in a week. They have to kick 5 or 6 people out. Wow. So it's a really common thing, and so it's something we just didn't want to have to deal with.
Yeah, it sounds like your intentionality is paying off, essentially.
And the other thing is we're also like, hey, if we're closing at 8, we want to be able to be done and then also go out and have fun, go out to have dinner, all the staff go get dinner or have life after work, work in the industry, work until 1, 2, 3 in the morning. I don't want to do that anymore. And like most employees don't want to do that. So I wanted to open a place that wasn't even an option, that we weren't, there is always more money to be made, but not at the cost of like me. I mean, I'm already working so many hours and our staff are. Mm-hmm. If we were open till, even 11, sometimes that would mean you don't get it done till like, 1 in the morning. And it's like, I couldn't even wrap my head around that now.
Yeah.
So, and then also what's interesting is the pandemic's kind of changed how people dine and it's changed a lot of stuff where that's almost like, we were always intending to not be a late spot, but the pandemic kind of changed that late night crowd where it doesn't really exist anymore. Like places aren't really open past 9. I mean, places around town that I remember used to be like, oh yeah, we would be there till midnight or 1. Like they all close at like 10, 9 or 10. So just there's a lot of things. I think staffing is always an issue, but I think just it's changed the way people kind of go out and way people go to businesses. And a lot changed specifically during the pandemic, but I think these years leading up after, we're really starting to see like habits change and come back. And I think restaurants are still in this pivot of trying to figure out like what that is.
Different question. Do you have any advice for anyone who's considering some type of self-employed career? It
definitely takes a certain kind of crazy. And if you're that kind of crazy, then, go for it. Taking your time to do it and not jumping into it too soon. Like I said, we almost did initially, and I'm glad we didn't. But, I think for anybody who's going to succeed doing it, it's the right kind of person. And you see that, like, everybody's like the idea of like, oh, yeah, I want to do my own thing. But if you really, truly are passionate about something and you have that drive, I think you'll do really well. But again, it takes a certain kind of crazy. Yeah. And those people generally already know that they're that kind of crazy like us and that they are workaholics and they just are passionate about what they do. And, if you find enjoyment in it, then you can make it a career and you can kind of start your own thing. I think it works out pretty well.
Yeah, well, your story is a testament to that, right? How can people find you, like, as far as, like, Common Fields?
You can search Common Fields, and we pretty much now pop up on any kind of Google search, but, we have a website, so commonfieldscorvallis.com. We also have, like, Instagram, Facebook. They're all going to be Common Fields Corvallis. So, yeah, the Corvallis to the end, and that's going to be easier to search us. But, yeah, through our social media, websites, that's always going to be the easiest. That has our menus. Sure. It has all the activities we have going on. Anything you see online, people get excited, but whenever they come for the first time, they're always like, it doesn't do it justice. Like this place, like people will spend 15, 20 minutes just kind of walking around, just trying to take it all in. And luckily, all of our staff, the staff we have now, we've had almost since the beginning. We have pretty much a good core crew, and they're all very knowledgeable. And they'll see someone wandering around lost, and they're like, hey, let me. This is your first time here. Let me tell you all about the place. Right. So that's really cool.
That's awesome. Well, thank you, Jacob, for your time. This has been great talking with you. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And there you have it. That was another great conversation with Jacob. If you want to hear more conversations like this, then subscribe or follow the podcast. Until then, this has been the Bossless Path. Catch you next time.